Why does Valve have to keep saving us from publishers' bad calls? If you didn't know, earlier this week, Capcom broke a major game in a way that stopped it from working on the Steam Deck. We're going to talk about that, and we're also going to talk about a handheld maker that keeps making really poor choices and how Valve is making things easier for noobs. Plus, the incredible growth of a certain Pokemon-inspired game, and fighting game fans are eating really good right now. We're also going to talk about a nice discount coming to another handheld, one of my favorites, and if that isn't enough, we've got another big verified game coming to the Steam Deck and a fantastic Proton update that improves a ton of games. And finally, a really disappointing story that I have what I'm guessing is going to be considered a hot take on. We've been here before. This keeps happening over and over, and it seems like publishers doing this just don't seem to care. In December 2 years ago, we saw EA break games on the Steam Deck. Valve stepped in and rescued those games with Proton. Microsoft pulled the same shenanigans, breaking Forza Horizon 5 in October of last year, and Proton hotfix saved the day. And these aren't the only two examples of this happening, and guess what? They won't be the last. In fact, just this week, Capcom apparently learning absolutely nothing from the backlash to their adding Enigma DRM to some of their older titles in order to stop modding or cheating or whatever BS excuse they're giving these days. They decided to do the exact same thing with one of their biggest games, Monster Hunter Rise. 2 years after its November 2021 release date, and surprising absolutely no one, it broke Steam Deck compatibility. Of course, Valve was able to step in with a Proton hotfix, which allows the game to run, but that is beside the point. I have said it before, I'll say it again. The idea that I can buy a game and devs can essentially break it years after I've made my purchase is infuriating. Though I do understand why it's happening. We'll get to that in a little bit. I already owned Monster Hunter Rise on the Switch. I doubled down on the PC version specifically to play it on my Steam Deck because I loved the game so much. And the game just plays so fantastically well on Valve's handheld, hence the reason why it's verified. Of course, we could go on and on about how little verified actually means, as there are oodles of games out there that are verified that shouldn't be, and a greater number of games that aren't even marked playable that play just fine on the deck. But that's another video. But this issue has been a thorn in the side of the Steam Deck ever since day one, and I think the only way around it is for Valve to just sell a boatload of Steam Decks. The bigger the deck's install base is, the harder it's going to be for companies like Capcom and EA or anyone else out there to hamstring games from running on the Steam Deck without a thought. Now, to be fair, I don't think that Capcom is sitting around a boardroom somewhere saying, how can we screw over the Linux users? The real issue is that we are such a small segment of the gaming population that they don't really need to think about us. Luckily, Valve has been really quick with fixes when it comes to Proton, but I hope at some point in the future, we don't have to depend on Valve to save us over and over and over. Moving on to the Aya Neo Next Lite. When it was announced a few weeks back, they had on their marketing materials that it was going to be shipping with SteamOS. That idea is pretty exciting. I was skeptical that it was actually SteamOS, and I said as much in my video. Well, the day after I put my video out, they announced that it was actually not in fact SteamOS. It was instead a version that ships without Steam called Hollow ISO. Originally, I felt this was just an issue with translation, and I chalked it up to an honest mistake. As I always like to say, I never assume malice when I can assume that it's a mistake. So I gave them the benefit of the doubt. But now it turns out that it isn't even shipping with Hollow ISO. Instead, they're going to be shipping this with Windows 11, and they're going to have a version of Hollow ISO available for download. Some people are going to say that they lied again, but according to their post, which I found over at Gaming on Linux, they're doing it because their users want Windows. Now, I'm not sure what they mean when they say real gamers know gamers. That sounds kind of like gatekeeping to me, which I always hate. I'm not a fan of. And personally, I don't want Windows, but I'm sure there are a lot of people out there that do. So I'll give them the benefit of the doubt one more time, but I'm also pretty trusting. What do you guys think? Are they trying to just stay in the news cycle by doing this kind of misinformation, or are they simply responding to user demand? I think personally a better solution would be for the user buying the device to have an option at checkout to choose the operating system that they want so that people can get exactly what they're interested in. But what do I know? I know I don't have a sponsor on this video, so I will take a second to say thank you to all of the channel members. You guys are all awesome. I also will mention that there is a Souls-like bundle going on over at Humble Bundle, and I have an affiliate link down below, so if you want to support the channel and get a bunch of games really cheap, there's a link down below to do that. Back to it. Valve recently updated the beta software for the Steam Deck, and I think it's more important than most people realize. Ever since the Steam Deck came out, there has been a lot of back and forth about, is it a console? Is it a PC? Valve says it's a PC, but sometimes they call it a console. I personally have always said console because it is a built-for-purpose gaming machine. I think the best explanation is from my buddy Kyle, who says,
what I always say is that it's a console by default and an opt-in PC. If you don't want it, you don't need it, but you have the ability to.
By the way, if you don't subscribe to Kyle's channel, he is a member of the NerdNest podcast and he's awesome. So link to his channel down below that like button. Well, since it's a console by default and PC as an option, there are a lot of people that bought the Steam Deck and expect it to work like a console. And many of them don't know or care what TDP is, what variable rate shading does, or what most of the settings in the quick access menu actually do. Well, Valve's latest update to the beta channel makes it easier for those that are a little bit less tech savvy to understand this stuff. Honestly, this is something that all devs should do on PC. For years, I didn't really understand what the different settings would do, and I would just kind of turn them on and off randomly, hoping for some kind of performance boost. And I've always appreciated it when I go into the settings of a game and it says, this thing is going to boost your frame rate. Choosing this is going to make the game look nicer. In fact, the deck is one of the moments of clarity for me thanks to Mango HUD. I can open up the quick access menu, turn on the performance overlay, and see all of the relevant data. And then as I change settings in my game, I can see in real time how it affects the game performance. Now, users will be able to read what each of the settings do, and that means a lot of users are going to be able to better understand how the deck works without having to go elsewhere for the information. A very console-like way of doing a PC-like thing. Next up, is Nintendo going to sue Palworld? They've mentioned that they are aware of Palworld. That would make anybody that I know very nervous, and I'd have said, yeah, they're absolutely getting sued by Nintendo, but something has changed my mind. We'll get to that in just a second. First, I want to catch everyone up. If you don't know, Palworld is described pretty poorly as Pokemon with guns. On the surface level, this comparison makes a lot of sense, as you have creatures that are obviously inspired by Pokemon or even ripped off whole cloth from Pokemon. More on that in a bit. And yes, there are guns in the game, but the game is actually more like a sandbox base building game, and it's less about collecting every pal out there and more about getting pals and using them to accomplish tasks. So first off, is the game a ripoff of Pokemon? Well, if you look at the images of the pals versus the Pokemon, I would say obviously yes, but in the same breath, you could look at Pokemon from early generations and compare them to Pokemon from later generations, and you could say there's only so many designs you can have for a cute little animal type monster thing, right? However, there are some pals in Palworld that are so blatant it's almost impossible to deny where the design came from. I'll leave that up to the lawyers to decide. I don't know anything about that. But I don't know that Nintendo is actually going to sue. Early on, I would have said, yes, absolutely, they're going to litigate. They are a ridiculously litigious company after all. But the fact that they recently set a DMCA takedown notice, or was it a cease and desist? I don't remember which one. It doesn't matter. They sent a legal notice to a modder that had made characters from Pokemon and brought them into Pal World, but they have yet to do similar legal actions against the game themselves. Tells me that Nintendo is being a little bit more cautious about this. Perhaps it's not nearly as cut and dry as everybody says. Regardless, the game is doing absolutely gangbusters, and it has sold 7 million copies and in just 5 days. And by the time you actually watch this, I'm sure it's going to be even higher. And they've taken the number 2 spot for concurrent users on Steam from Counter-Strike 2 with only PUBG in front of them. And with that kind of momentum that they have, I just don't see any chance that this game doesn't take that top spot. We recently had a pretty detailed discussion about this game on the NerdNest podcast. I played a little bit of it on the Xbox. I find the performance to be pretty subpar. I know that the game runs on the Steam Deck, but you do have to jump through quite a few hoops in order to get it running. I've considered picking it up on PC, but with the possibility that Nintendo could come after them and shut them down, it makes me hesitate. The game is a very multiplayer-centric style of game. You can play solo, but a lot of fun comes from multiplayer. And if it gets shut down because Nintendo decides, yes, I'm going to sue, well, we may run into one of those rug pull moments. But what do you all think? Are we going to see a big fight between Nintendo and this ridiculously quickly growing game? Let me know what you think in the comments down below that like button. Speaking of fights, fighting game fans have had a fantastic year in 2023 with Street Fighter 6 and Mortal Kombat 1, and it looks like it isn't stopping in 2024. Capcom released Street Fighter 6 in June of last year, earning a 92 on Metacritic. Mortal Kombat 1 released in September and got an 83, and they both had a user score of 7 and 7.1 respectively. I haven't played Mortal Kombat 1, but I played a boatload of Street Fighter 6, and I absolutely love that game. Well, it's been since about 9 years since the last numbered update for the Tekken series. Tekken 7 released in 2015, with a few updates since then, but Tekken 8 is right around the corner, and the critic reviews are really good. This game releases on January 26th. It is currently sitting at a 90 on Metacritic, and as I record this, I honestly can't wait to try it out. I've skipped every single Tekken game. I played the first one on a PS1 at a party back when I was in the army, but I never ever played any of them after that, and I know I'm missing out. By the way, what series is on your list of shame? You know, the games that are huge but you've never played? Leave a comment down below, and if you can't think of one, tell us your favorite fighting game. Are you hyped for Tekken? By the way, this review from Touch Arcade says that they were able to massage pretty decent frame rates out of the PC version of the game on Steam Deck, typically getting a great 60 frames per second experience during real fights with a mix of medium to below settings, but the story mode having some issues with extra stuff happening on screen. This is pretty similar to what happened with Street Fighter 6 in my experience, where online battles can handle 60 frames per second no problem, but going into the other non-standard modes gets you a pretty low frame rate on the deck. Okay, if you have been on the fence and you're not sure which handheld system you should get, my recommendation is still going to be the Steam Deck, especially now that we have the OLED as an option. However, I totally understand that there are a lot of people out there that really want a Windows machine, if for no other reason than it has better compatibility with more games. Game Pass works on there, and all of the issues that I talked about at the beginning of the video don't really exist on Windows Handheld outside of, performance issues from something like the Enigma DRM. But at least the games would still run. If you want a Windows handheld, then my personal recommendation is going to be for the Lenovo Legion Go. For me, it is my go-to Windows handheld. It has that massive 8.8-inch screen. It pretty much solves all of the problems that I have with Windows on a handheld, though I absolutely would prefer running SteamOS on it. Someday, Valve, someday. Well, if you're in the market, there is currently a sale over at Ant Online. I've never bought from them, but if you're getting one, it's currently $80 off as I record this. And if you want to pick it up at Best Buy, both SKUs of the system are $50 off. Personally, I know you would save more at Ant Online, but I would prefer going with Best Buy. They have a pretty decent return policy, and if you realize that you don't like the bulk of the Legion Go, then you can return it. I'll leave a link to my review in the description down below. Anyway, moving on, Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth is getting really great reviews, and according to Rock Paper Shotgun, you can get a pretty nice experience on the Steam Deck. You will have to cut some of the settings down to size, but if you switch to the lowest preset and you swap from FSR1 to FSR2, you should be able to maintain 30 frames per second, which is pretty decent for an RPG like this. If you're running an OG deck, then you're going to get about an hour and a half of battery life, and if you're on the OLED Steam Deck, then you'll get about 2 hours with these settings. Oh, by the way, speaking of the OLED Steam Deck, do you know what these games have in common? Resident Evil 2, 3, 7, and Village, Hogwarts Legacy, Mass Effect Legendary Edition, Injustice 2, Alan Wake 2, and Devil May Cry 5? Pause the video, think about it for a second, and leave a comment down below. What do these things have in common? I'll wait. Okay, welcome back. Let's see if you got it. Recently, all of those games received an update to HDR on the OLED Steam Deck thanks to the latest Proton update. Here's a tweet from Pierre-Loup Griffet that explains the huge number of game fixes from Proton 8.0.5, as well as the upgrades to HDR. What's even cooler is that the games that aren't even Steam games, like Alan Wake 2, have had fixes. I just love it when Valve does this kind of stuff. Microsoft just announced that they are laying off 1,900 employees, meaning 2023 and 2024 have been an absolute disaster for devs with layoff after layoff. In fact, there was recently a poll at GDC where devs were asked if they've been laid off or they've been affected by the layoffs, and 11% said that they were laid off, and 33% said that they were affected by the layoffs, meaning they knew someone or that the department had lost people. I hate it when people that make the games for us get cut out. While these big companies are making massive record profits, just look at Microsoft. They recently became the most valuable company in the world, pushing past Apple, and now they're laying off 8% of Activision Blizzard. Now, here's the hot take that I talked about earlier. This sucks, but it isn't surprising. In fact, it was even predicted that this would happen. Let's say I run a small shop and I buy the shop next door, knock down the wall between them. Do I really need to have 2 cash registers with 2 employees running them? Maybe, but maybe I don't. When a big company sucks up a small company, there are going to be a lot of jobs that have overlap. Microsoft is going to have to cut those jobs. I totally understand that happening. Now, I'm not heartless, so don't yell at me in the comments, because I do think that there is a better solution than what Microsoft did. Microsoft buying Activision Blizzard means that they suddenly have a ton of IP that they didn't have before. Why not take the devs that they're firing right now and have them work on some new IP in this way? In addition, Mike Ybarra, the president of Blizzard, is leaving the company as well, and Microsoft canceled an unnamed survival game that Blizzard was working on. This comes hot on the heels of Riot Games, Google, Discord, and so many more having layoffs. It seems like a really rough time to be a dev, which is just such a strange juxtaposition against how well the industry seems to be doing. We've been getting amazing game after amazing game, and then the people who make those games get fired. Hopefully something will change sooner rather than later, and the people in charge of the money will get a better handle on how important the devs are that make these games. Though my tinfoil hat tells me that layoffs in January are a strategic move from a company that is going to be more stock market perspective kind of thing. I think Satoru Iwata, the former president of Nintendo, said it best. If we reduce the number of employees for a better short-term financial results, employee morale will decrease. I sincerely doubt employees who fear that they may be laid off will be able to develop software titles that could impress people around the world. Not only that, but if good devs are worried that their jobs are next on the chopping block, they might decide to look for work elsewhere. Anyway, from the Nerd Nest, I'm Bill. Stay rad, everybody. Oh, and watch this video next. Bye-bye.